children's church with you guys, I talked about Daniel and the lion's den. In the same book of the Bible, book of Daniel, there's another dramatic thing that takes place. The three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were deported from their home and in prison in Babylon. The king Nebuchadnezzar saw they were good people, honest folks, and so he put them in charge of some of the government. But then Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be praised as a supreme one, God. And so he built a big gold statue. And he sent word out that everybody must bow down at the sound of music to the statue. Well, these three guys wouldn't do it. And you know what? Some of the people around went to King Nebuchadnezzar and told him about these three fellows. And King Nebuchadnezzar had decided that if anybody doesn't bow down, are they going to be put in a lion's den? No. They're going to be put in a fiery furnace. And when he heard that these three fellows would not bow down, he gave word to heat the fiery furnace 7 times hotter than it already was. Now that meant that they would be burned alive, that burned to a crisp. But that's not the way the story goes, is it? The next morning when, as I heard one preacher said, old Nep went to see how they were, he saw that there not only was 3 men in there, but there was a 4th one in there. And I think it's quite interesting. Not a hair on their head was singed because of this hot flame. So Nebuchadnezzar said, I see a 4th man, and I saw 3 in. And the 4th man is like the Son of God. When we're in the midst of trouble, may we always have the 4th person with us. That is God Himself. Father, thank you. Thank you for the stories in the Bible that remind us that we must depend upon God in the midst of all of our troubles. In Jesus' name, amen. This morning I'd like for us to turn to Mark chapter 4, beginning with verse 35. I took my tie off because I knew Rose Ellen did not like the way my collar was turning up like that, like I was going to fly away. So if you don't like it, I do have a tie. It's there beside my wife. If you want to see it, I'll have her to hold it up.
Brother Otis, can you please repeat where you're going to put the
Mark 4,
Thank you.
verse 35 and following. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
You did, I didn't hear it.
Have you ever heard of somebody referring to the difficulties of life as being storms of life? Have you ever heard, well, they are weathering the storm? That's been around for a long time, hasn't it? As long as I can remember, I've heard that statement. Well, the story that is before us shows us how we are to deal with the storms that come in our lives. Since we all experience difficulties sometime in life, it is very important that we learn how to deal with them. And I believe this story gives us 3 ways we can deal with the storms that come in our lives. If we trust God to help us, the storms will affect us in a much different way than if we try to deal with it on our own. We do not know when the storm is going to come. We do not know how long the storm is going to last. But there's one thing for sure, that after a period of time, God will end the storm if we depend on Him. So let's focus our attention on Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. Now, it is the story about Jesus and the disciples by the Sea or Lake of Galilee. And as a result, the people who are involved in this story primarily is Jesus and His disciples. The day had begun just as any ordinary day. Jesus had been with His disciples, and they had traveled from one town to another. Jesus had healed people. Jesus had preached to crowds of people. And it was indeed just another day in the life of Christ. The disciples had no idea that they were going to be thrust into a life-threatening situation. And many people do not know that I was thinking when I was preparing this of Tony Wilson, who went to work one morning, and I'm not sure what kind of building he was on, but he got into electric wire, and he's been in Vanderbilt now. This is the 25th day. And yesterday, Tony wiggled his toes the first time at the command of the doctor. He did not know that the storm was going to come his way. But friend, I think he's really been in a major storm, and the family has too. As far as the disciples were concerned, the day was just another day. And if they needed to get in the boat to go across the lake, or the sea as it's called in the King James Version, as they had done before, they would do so. So I want us to begin in verse 35 with the first thing that helped us deal with the storms of life. And we need to listen closely to part of this verse anyway. And the same day, when the evening was come, He said unto them, Let us pass over, or go over, to the other side. Now, He did not say, let us go out and face the storm. But the important word in this is pass over to the other side. There is the promise. Someone has said, and I don't know whether it's true or not, I'm not counting them all, but I heard a preacher say just this past week that there are 32,000 promises in the Bible. I've heard people say ever since I can remember that there are 365 promises in the Bible, one for each day. I don't know how many there are, but there are many promises in God's Word. The disciples were confident that as long as Jesus was with them, everything was going to be okay. Because their confidence was in the presence of Jesus. When we are in the midst of the storm, we need to make sure we have the promise from God to help us through. The disciples put their trust only though in this passage in what they saw. They really did not hear, and it's amazing to me how, pardon this, ladies, but us men can say something and you hear it, but you don't hear it. I mean, us men always hear exactly what I'm kidding there. But it's amazing. We don't really hear what is being said. So Jesus had told them that let us pass over. Jesus was in full control. Once they were in the boat, they knew he could control the situation. But as the darkness came, and as they rowed over the peaceful sea, everything was great. And as a result of their being great, they knew Jesus was with them. It is important for us in our walk in life, when storms come, to hear the promise of God and to trust Him for what He can do, not just what we see. The Scripture tells us that Jesus was tired from healing these people and preaching all day long. And the disciples probably were also tired themselves. Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen, because He had told them, let us pass over. Now, the reason why He's going to the other side, we'll see as we continue this morning. We often are subconsciously thinking that what catches us off by surprise is surprise to God. But I heard when I was just a teenager a preacher say, God never says, oh, that surprised me. For He knows what's going to happen with every one of us. And if you read in the Old Testament, in Isaiah chapter 46, hear what is said there in chapter 46, verse 9 and 10. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. Declare the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, the things that are not get done saying, I'm going to have my cataracts take care of one of these days. Sometimes I just don't see it as I should. My counsel shall stand, and I will do my pleasure. Well, the first thing we need to do in the midst of difficult situations or storms that come in our lives is to make sure Jesus, or we are with Jesus. He is with us, but make sure we are with Him. The second thing, in verse 36 down through verse 38, is His presence. So not only remember His promise that He'll be with us to the end of the age, but we need to remember His presence as well. As they rowed along in the boat across the Sea of Galilee or the lake, they were alone with Jesus. And I want you to know, every storm of life that we have is very individual to us. I've been with people who had cancer. But when Carolyn got cancer, and during the time before she died, it was very personal to me what was going on. And I needed to have the presence of God in my life. So as I sailed across the water, Jesus found a cushion or pillow, as it says there in the scripture, in verse 36. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him as he was in the ship. And there was also other ships, little ships with them. And there was a great storm of wind and waves that beat into the ship, so that it was full. In verse 37, we see where the disciples, in the midst of the storm, came to the place where Jesus was asleep and the winds were blowing so hard. I find it interesting what it says. And the waves beat into the ship so that it is now full. It had become so full of water and heavy that it began to sink. Up to this time, they thought they could handle the situation themselves. And there are many times when we're in the storm of life, we think we can handle the situation ourselves. They didn't want to disturb God or Jesus, and so the disciples did the best they could. They were fishermen. They'd been in storms before. They knew they could handle this. You may have been in storms before in your life, but sometimes the storm is so big that you can't handle it. Jesus had fallen asleep. Why was he asleep? Because he was tired. People get tired, and that is normal. Probably the disciples thought that's just the way it is. At first, they did not seem to be too concerned. When we are going through life and everything is going well, we don't realize we need God's presence in our lives. But then at one point, they came to the place where they realized, hey, if Jesus doesn't do something, we're goners. And we all have to come to the place where we need Jesus present in our lives. Sometimes in our lives as Christians, God seems to be silent. Even in those times, we need His presence. The disciples could physically see Jesus, but as long as things were going well, it was okay for Him to be asleep. But then notice what happens in verse 38. In verse 38, it says, he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? The truth is that God needs us to realize that He is in our lives every day. Sometimes we stray, and when we do, we always get in trouble. But the disciples continued to paddle their way to the other side of the lake. The disciples now see that the problem is too big for them to handle. Have you ever come to the place in your life where you finally realize that the situation that you're in is something that you can't handle by yourself? I do it quite often. But you know what I usually do? What most people do. I pray, I claim to trust God, then I do everything I can and look if there's some other way to get out of this. The disciples had a problem. Jesus was asleep. If we have a problem and choose to deal with it ourselves, it makes God helpless to work in our lives. Because then when we get through with it, we say, look what I did, instead of look what He did. And that makes all the difference in the world. God works through our faith to handle. And our faith must not be inactive. Our experience coupled with pride and their experience it's lost. Excuse me. Our experience coupled with our pride and their experience coupled with, you know what I said? We'll just go ahead and deal with it. They continued to battle the waves themselves. And I don't know what they thought. He doesn't tell us. Probably shouldn't say it either. But anyway, I wonder if they didn't think, with these waves coming in so hard and this water in the boat, Jesus just really ought to wake up and come to our aid. But you know what? They had not yet asked Him to. And I have found out in my own life, God is not going to knock the door down to come into my life without I ask Him to, without I let Him come in. The water was flowing so heavy. They knew Jesus loved them, but where was He now? Asleep. Surely the waves would wake Him up. Surely the wind would wake Him up. We find ourselves in desperate circumstances, and we finally cry out to God. We keep nothing in response, and the conditions remain the same. They must have thought, doesn't Jesus know where we are at? And the answer is definitely yes. He knows where we are all the time. But they ask Him the question, do you not care that I perish? And sometimes in my own experience, I've come to God and said, God, don't you know this situation I'm in? Well, the answer is yes. God knows exactly what my situation is. Finally, the disciples did the right thing. They decided to quit depending on themselves and start depending on God. They were threatened to drown. Like us, we have great challenges before us, and we think we are beyond the help of God. Now, they thought probably Jesus can heal folks, and He can preach to them and save them. Well, sure, He has no authority over the wind and the water. How crazy we are. All things are possible to God, and all things are possible for us who believe in Him. We believe God can take care of a little headache, but when there's major problems in our lives, we want to depend totally on the doctors. Then Jesus asked them a very stunning question. Verse 39, and He arose and rebuked the wind and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. I don't know how many times in my own experience God has had to speak peace in the situation that I was in. As they relaxed in this restored peace, Jesus asked them a very pointed question. Why are you so fearful? And then He says, how is it you have no faith? Now, earlier in chapter 1, they had already seen Jesus heal the man with an unclean spirit, cast it out. They had already seen Jesus heal Peter's wife. In chapter 2, they had seen Jesus heal the man that the 4 men had brought to Him and tore the rooftop up and let him down. They had seen Jesus heal him. They had seen in chapter 3 the man with the withered hand. In chapter 4, they had seen Jesus share tremendous words with the crowd of people. Remember, Jesus was with them in the boat. Jesus is with us in our lives if we are His children. And there are some people who want God to do something for them, but they have never asked to be a child of His. We panic. We become fearful. We need to forget what our eyes see and what we have been taught to believe concerning God. It is typical of many of us to cry out to God in fear instead of crying out to Him in faith. In fear of what's going to happen, instead of in fear of believing that He will do what needs to be done. Our distress can move God. We know that because Matthew chapter 21:22 says, "And all things whatsoever you ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive." Now there is a condition to that. If we are in His will, we will receive it. If we ask in prayer, we are not to ask things that are not in His will. You remember Jesus when He was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He asked the Father to let the cup pass from Him. He said, "Nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done." And so it'd be great if it ended there, but it doesn't. Go on to verse 41. And in verse 41, "And they feared exceedingly." Now, what we would say that down in North Mississippi is they were scared to death. And said one to another, "What man is this, that even the wind and the sea or waves," whichever translation you got, or water, "obey him?" It is quite interesting that immediately when He told the waves, the wind, to stop, they did. When God moves in our lives, He can do it instantly. Now, most time when preachers use this passage of Scripture, they do not tell us what happened. The reason they needed to go to the other side of the lake. But verse 1 of chapter 5. And by the way, I don't know how those who translated the Bible chose the chapters and verses that they did. One of my seminary professors said he had heard years ago that the way our Bible is divided into verses and chapters is that a scribe rode along in a chariot. He had a pen in his hand, and if he touched lightly, it was a verse. If he made a line, it was a chapter. Well, this is one of those places where the chapter, we don't need to stop there. We need to keep looking. Because when they got to the other side of the lake, or the Sea of Galilee, Jesus got out of the boat because there was a special need there. A man who had been out in the graveyard living, they had kept him tied in chains, and he could even break them. I mean, the power of the devil sometimes is great. But he came to Jesus, needing deliverance. And that seems to be what Jesus does. Now, it doesn't tell us here, and I wonder if the disciples were not so fearful of this man that they just stayed in the boat. But then later on it says he was clothed and in his right mind. Up to then he was just naked out there in the graveyard. But he was clothed and in his right mind. Evidently the disciples shared with him some of their clothing so that he could be clothed. As we look at the scripture, we read over in chapter 5, verse 19. Jesus had healed him, cast the demons out into the swine. And then in verse 19, Jesus got back in the boat. You know where he was going? Back to where he came from. It was no accident that they were in the boat, because Jesus had an appointment on the other side of the water. And as a result, the man came and said, Jesus, I'm going to paraphrase, he said, Jesus, there in verse 19, I want to go with you and be your disciple. But notice what Jesus said of him in verse 9. In verse 19, Jesus tells him to go home to thy friends and tell them how great things the Lord has done for you, and have had compassion on you. He was simply saying, you're needed here more than you needed where we're going. So when you have a storm that suddenly comes up in your life, or gradually arrives, you need to look for a promise from the Lord. And you need to make sure you're in the presence of Jesus. And third, you need to depend upon the power of Almighty God in your life. Then we can rest assured that if we trust God through our storms, He will always bring us out. He will make up for the distress and the pain in the end. And we will grow in a greater knowledge of Him. I want to tell you that I am not Jewish, but I am so Hebraic in my thinking. I don't think anything happens in our lives by accident. Again, I want to say, God never says, that surprises me. So I challenge you and me to depend on the promises of God, to depend on the presence of Jesus and God in our lives, and depend upon the power to help us through any situation. Our invitation on hymn today is hymn number 321. As we stand and as we sing.
There's nothing in this world to be
what would you have done if you had been on that boat on that day? You say, I don't know, that was 2,000 years ago. Well, you're in the boat now. What are you doing there? God bless us as we go our way. Protect us as we serve you in the midst of the storms of life. Guide us and direct us. And for those who are closest, difficulties coming, bless them in a special way, God. Use their storm to draw them closer to you. In Jesus' name.